March 1941, Mayer Island Naval Shipyard, Vallejo, California. The welding torch flickered in the dim light of the submarine construction bay as Edward Nelson, an $11-a-day welder, scrolled his frustration in a worn notebook. There has to be a better way. This is madness. The Navy supervisors keep telling me to work faster, but they refuse to listen to my solution. Through the maze of scaffolding beneath the wooden deck of a submarine under construction, he had just witnessed something that made his blood boil. A dozen workers spent an entire shift just to install a single section of deck planking. Enormous scaffolding structures filled the interior compartments below each wooden deck. Men with wrenches working in cramped spaces, twisting nuts onto bolts that penetrated from above. Hours upon hours of labor just to secure wooden planks to steel frames. The traditional method demanded precision, patience, and precious time. Time that America did not have as war clouds gathered over the Pacific. Yet here, in what would soon become one of the busiest shipyards in the world, attachment methods were the same as they had been for decades. Theodore Edward Nelson, 36 years old, California-born, had earned his mechanical knowledge the hard way. 15 years in machine shops across California, 15 years of learning how metal behaved, how electricity flowed, how problems could be solved if only someone would listen. What none of the Navy supervisors knew was that this frustrated welder had already solved their problem. And what Nelson did not yet know was that his simple solution, rejected and dismissed by his superiors, would soon save the United States Navy more than 50 million man-hours and fundamentally change naval construction forever. The transformation had begun weeks earlier in the cramped interior spaces below decks, where the real war against inefficiency was being fought every single day. The date was March 15, 1941, 8 months and 22 days before Pearl Harbor. Mayer Island Naval Shipyard stretched across 635 acres along the Napa River in Vallejo, California, 25 miles northeast of San Francisco. Founded in 1854 by Commander David Glasgow Farragut, it was the first United States Navy base established on the Pacific Ocean. By early 1941, Mayer Island had evolved into the premier West Coast submarine construction facility. The yard operated around the clock, 3 shifts of workers 7 days a week. Submarine construction had accelerated dramatically as tensions mounted with Japan. The yard employed approximately 12,000 civilian workers in early 1941, a number that would eventually swell to nearly 50,000 by 1944. Among those 12,000 workers was Ted Nelson, employee number 3872. He earned $11 per day, working the day shift from 7 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. His job was welding, primarily on submarine hulls and internal structures. He was good at his work, fast and precise, but increasingly frustrated by what he saw as wasteful inefficiency. The problem was everywhere he looked. Wooden deck planking installation on submarines, destroyers, and aircraft carriers. The Navy specified wooden decks for several reasons. Wood provided better traction than steel in wet conditions, was less reflective under sunlight, and offered some insulation from heat and sound. But attaching wood to steel presented serious challenges. Traditionally, the deck beams, frames, and stringers of ships were made of steel, while the decking itself was constructed of heavy, thick planks of teak or Douglas fir. To attach these wooden planks securely, hundreds of steel bolts passed through each section. From below, men had to reach up into narrow spaces to thread nuts onto the ends of these bolts. Many of the bolts were several inches long, requiring washers, lock washers, and nuts. Every single fastener had to be tightened by hand. The process was slow, physically exhausting, and inefficient. Even worse, once the ship was in service, moisture and salt air caused the nuts to corrode, making future maintenance nearly impossible. Ted Nelson had spent months watching this dance of inefficiency. One afternoon, while working inside the hull of a submarine under construction, he began to think about alternatives. Why not eliminate the need for nuts altogether? If the bolts themselves could somehow be welded directly to the steel deck beams, the entire process could be simplified. Workers could then install wooden planks from above and secure them quickly, without anyone crawling into the cramped spaces below. The idea seemed obvious, yet when Nelson presented it to his supervisors, they laughed. Welding bolts directly to the structure, impossible, they said. The heat would destroy the threads. The bolts wouldn't hold, it was against Navy regulations. Nelson walked away, angry but determined. He knew it could work if done correctly. So on his own time, after hours, he began experimenting. Using scrap materials from the yard, he tested different voltages, currents, and welding angles. Slowly, he refined his discovered that if he applied a short, concentrated burst of heat to the bolt's base, he could fuse it to the steel plate without damaging the threads. The result was a perfectly strong, clean weld that required no nuts or washers. Nelson was thrilled. He had invented what would later be known as the stud welding process, a method that allowed metal fasteners to be welded instantly to metal surfaces using electric current. It was simple, efficient, and revolutionary, but convincing the Navy was another matter. When Nelson once again demonstrated his invention, his foreman remained skeptical. The Navy inspectors dismissed it outright. Regulations, they insisted, required through bolts and nuts. No exceptions, but Nelson refused to give up. Quietly, he continued perfecting his method, sharing his findings with a few trusted co-workers who began using his technique on small, hidden sections of ships. The results spoke for themselves. The welds held perfectly under stress tests, resisted corrosion, and could be completed in seconds instead of hours. Word began to spread through the shipyard. Nelson's crazy idea was saving time and labor on every job it touched. Eventually, his technique caught the attention of higher-ups, including naval engineers desperate to increase ship production as war approached. And suddenly, the idea no one wanted to hear was now being discussed in offices filled with men in uniform. In mid-1941, the Navy authorized limited trials of Nelson's welding process on several submarines and destroyers under construction. The results were nothing short of astonishing. Installation times for deck planking dropped by nearly 80%. Workers no longer had to crawl through dark, confined spaces to tighten bolts by hand. Maintenance crews later discovered that the welded studs resisted corrosion far better than traditional hardware. The Navy Bureau of Ships quickly recognized the potential of Nelson's process and ordered further testing and refinement. By late 1941, Nelson was assigned to a small team tasked with developing specialized equipment for his new technique. He designed a portable gun-like welding device capable of firing a metal stud into position and fusing it instantly to a metal surface using a timed electric arc. The device was simple, rugged, and operated easily by any trained worker. This was the birth of the Nelson stud welding gun, a tool that would soon become standard equipment in shipyards across America. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the United States suddenly faced the largest shipbuilding program in its history. Every available shipyard from the East Coast to the West raced to build new vessels at unprecedented speed. Nelson's process arrived at precisely the right moment. What had once been a single welder's frustration was now a crucial innovation, powering the arsenal of democracy. Within months, his technique spread through every major naval facility. The Navy estimated that Nelson's invention saved more than 50 million man-hours over the course of the war. That translated to faster ship turnarounds, lower costs, and far fewer injuries among workers. Nelson was officially recognized for his contribution, though he never sought fame. In 1942, the U.S. Navy formally adopted the process and the equipment became known as the Nelson Stud Welding System. His company, Nelson Welding Equipment Company, was established soon after to manufacture and supply the devices under government contract. By 1943, the stud welding process was being used not only on submarines and destroyers, but also on aircraft carriers, tankers, and merchant vessels. The technique allowed for faster installation of decks, bulkheads, insulation mounts, and even electrical fittings. It had become an indispensable part of modern ship construction. Beyond shipyards, the innovation began to spread to other industries. The same process proved ideal for attaching studs to bridges, tanks, and structural components in buildings. What began in frustration beneath a submarine deck was now revolutionizing construction worldwide. Ted Nelson's name became synonymous with efficiency and ingenuity, though few outside the naval industry ever heard of him. He continued his work quietly, improving his equipment and training thousands of welders in his method. His invention outlasted the war and became a standard across multiple engineering disciplines. To this day, every time a steel stud is welded to a surface using a stud gun, it carries forward the legacy of Ted Nelson, the welder from Vallejo who refused to accept inefficiency as the price of progress. His simple observation, born in the noise and heat of a wartime shipyard, reshaped how metalworkers around the world connect steel to steel. Today, the Nelson stud welding process remains a cornerstone of modern manufacturing, construction, and shipbuilding. From skyscrapers to bridges, from oil rigs to submarines, the same principle still applies: efficiency through innovation. Yet few remember the man who first saw that a bolt could be welded instead of bolted. Theodore Edward Nelson passed away quietly in 1986, leaving behind a legacy measured not in fame, but in the millions of hours saved and the countless structures held together by his invention. He was posthumously honored by the U.S. Navy for his contributions to the war effort, recognition long overdue. His story is a reminder that even in the midst of war, progress comes not only from generals and admirals, but from ordinary men with extraordinary ideas. The next time you see a steel beam lined with welded studs, think of the man who first imagined a better way while standing in the dim light of a shipyard, notebook in hand, determined to make things right. The war might have been won with bombs and battleships, but it was built by people like Ted Nelson. March 1941, Mare Island Naval Shipyard, Vallejo, California. The smell of hot steel filled the air as the welding torch flared again, bright against the dark frame of the submarine hull. Edward Nelson, once just a frustrated welder, had changed the course of naval engineering. His idea had become standard practice, saving not only time and labor but lives, because every ship that sailed sooner, every vessel repaired faster, brought America one step closer to victory. The sound of the torch, the spark of innovation, and the determination of one man proved that sometimes the smallest changes make the biggest difference. Across shipyards from Maine to California, welders picked up Nelson's stud gun, unaware of the man whose name it bore. They worked faster, safer, and smarter, building the fleet that would dominate the seas. In the end, that was all Nelson ever wanted, to make things work better. His legacy lived on not in statues or headlines, but in the quiet hum of electric welders and the gleam of steel decks stretching toward the horizon. And though history rarely remembers the welders behind the war machines, it was their hands, guided by innovation, that truly forged victory. Ted Nelson's journey from an overlooked shipyard worker to an unsung innovator stands as a testament to persistence, ingenuity, and courage in the face of doubt. Every revolution begins with one person asking, "Why not?" And in 1941, deep inside a submarine hull in California, one man's why not changed everything. His spark of brilliance, a welded stud, continues to hold together the world we built today.